Hey, what is up, mortals? It is Mr. Zombie here with a new video for you. Welcome to part 17, oh my god, of What If Izuku Had a Villain Quirk. I just wanted to greet you guys by saying sit back and relax. You're in for a treat. So, we begin. Izuku cursed the seemingly endless bad luck that seemed to be constantly over his head. They were face to face with more villains, and Pixie Bob was already injured by one of them. He snapped his head around looking around for Koda, the small child being in extreme danger in an environment like this. The thoughts were cut off as the reptilian villain came forward, beginning a monologue about how they were the Vanguard Action Squad of the League of Villains. The scarred villain introduced himself as Spinner, one of the newer criminals inspired by Stain's twisted ideals. Tiger stepped forward, anger radiating off of him as he shifted into a battle stance. Mandalay urged the students to head back to the camp, placing Ida in charge of getting them there. Izuku directly disobeyed the order and called out to the telepathic hero that he knew where her cousin's son was, and pointed it subtly out so she could send out a psychic message. The message arrived there, but the child was already in an encounter with a villain, a familiar one to him, the very same murderer who killed his parents, the villain known as Muscular. The psychotic man raised a hand to crush when a hissing sound caught their ears, and a green and red gas filled the air as Kota was tackled away. The black-haired tyke questioned why Midoriya was here, internally grateful that he had saved him. A quick analysis flashed through the teen's mind. The villain clearly knew who he was and possibly what his quirk was, which would make him difficult to beat. However, as he turned to see the crying boy, he steeled himself. He bit his lip as he felt the ruined part of May's mask shift. He drew close to the sacred child behind him. "Kota, listen to me," the Verdinian-eyed adolescent whispered softly just out of man's earshot. "The masks I usually carried with me were broken when we landed. I'm going to use my quirk, and whatever you do, don't breathe it in." A shaky nod was the response Izuku received, being enough for him as he stood up to face the hulking felon before him. The villain began taunting the hero in training, letting his enhancement quirk recede. "You're different than those other kids, aren't ya? Shigaraki was watching you at the sports festival. He saw how merciless you can be with your quirk." Some of the color in the student's face drained. "I was told that he couldn't bang you or that Katsuki kid up as much as the other heroes, but that won't stop me from seeing your blood." The man lunged forward, letting his quirk buff up one of his arms. It was rather foolhardily since the League had probably warned them of his quirk. He launched him and Kota back with a quick plume of gas before aiming his arms at the murderer. A sea of Opage fear toxin shot out from his arms, the pressure affecting the flight path of his foe and sending him to the edge of the overhang. An insane laugh was all he heard as a fist slammed him against the cliff face. Mocking words continued to spill from the villain's mouth, both worrying and anger in the protege of Midnight. A blast that potent should have neutralized the meathead criminal. Another punch was wound back, ready to hit him, and the teenager gritted his teeth, yelling out in rage as he unleashed another wave of his toxin. He was batted away again, the man stepping through it, confusion on his face for a moment before he shook it off. He began to mentally torture the injured young man, a voice calling him from behind. Kota had snapped out of his shock and began yelling questions at the gigantic male, whether he had hurt or tormented his parents the same way. The psychotic criminal dismissed the question, stating the only reason that they had died in the first place was because they got in the way. Their deaths were just the result of the participants in the fight doing their best. He turned around and got another face full of gas, slamming the source into the mountain again. A weak voice emanated from the dent in the mountainside. A bloody male stepped out. "I won't let you hurt him, you sick bastard." A laugh came from the villain as he prepared to kill the child of two of his previous victims. He took a single step before blinking for a second, rubbing his eyes. Fear began to fill him as he yelled out, "No!" over and over again. He began wildly swinging around in an empty night air. Midoriya leapt through the air and bathed Muscular in even more of his hallucinogen. The yelling began to evolve into screams as the sheer amount of toxin he had inhaled began to register in his large bodily system. The man was attacking wildly, stumbling off the cliff and continuing to attack on landing. "Damn it, it took long enough. I really wish that my quirk didn't have to act like actual toxins sometimes." The teen winced as he held his stomach, feeling his ribs possibly broken, bruised at least, and was in intense pain. "Grab on, Kota. We need to get out of here. Now!" The child nodded and hopped onto the hero and training's back, the teen taking off into the forest, guiding along the tree line with a judicious use of his quirk. For a while, the hissing of the gas was all that was heard.
Why? Why did you do that?
The tyke spoke softly.
You could have been killed, just like...
I did it because that's my duty, Koda. A small smile was revealed for a second as Izuku turned to look at his passenger for a brief moment. Heroes help people, no matter what it costs. Your parents never meant to leave you all alone. They just wanted to make the world a safer place for you. The night was silent again, before the orphan son of the water hose heroes began to sob once more, clinging tighter to his savior. The jungle-haired male wished he could comfort the younger one better, but he had his focus set on the blue flames in the distance. Koda, your quirk. Can you use it for me? He felt a shift from the kid on his back. Those flames in the distance. We need to put them out. My friends could be trapped by them and you may be the only one who can help them. Can you do it? He heard a soft but affirmative sound from his passenger. He smiled softly as he continued the path towards the fire, when the pain in his abdomen spiked. He grunted as he had to come in for an early landing, just beyond the halfway point of the blaze. Damn it! I can't steer us right with this pain constantly flaring up. I can barely keep myself from blacking out. He shifted his grip on the child on his back and ran through the forest. We'll have to go on foot. Keep an ear out for any trouble, alright? The two kept silent, the sound of their footfalls being the only audible thing around them. They heard the sound of another person approaching as they turned to see the 1A homeroom teacher there. The student called out to the pro, being extremely glad to see him. He pleaded with the pro to take care of Koda, but being stopped by him for a second so he could talk to Mandalay. The only reason he had asked the boy to do the earlier task was because he needed him to be safe. The best place for that being with his classmates. Knowing he wouldn't be able to talk him out, Eraserhead simply passed on a message for his fellow pro and squeezed a promise from the problematic boy that he'd remain safe. It was several minutes before the teen arrived at the clearing where he had left the wild pussycats. As he arrived, he saw a gigantic blade coming down at Mandalay and let loose a pressurizing blast, knocking the sword and its owner astray. Mandalay, I found Koda. He's okay. Izuku breathed heavily and painfully as he met the relieved eyes of the woman. Aizawa wanted you to pass a message to Class A and B. He has given us all permission to engage in fronts against the villains. The two villains recognized the injured adolescent immediately, as he was one of the people they were set to capture. I also need one more message sent. Verdinian eyes met with Magni and Spinners, seeing the recognition in them. They're not just here to attack. They're on a mission and searching for Kacchan and me. Mandalay's eyes widened as she asked who Kacchan was, hoping to find out who else was being targeted, only to see the boy launch into the air with his hallucinogen. The distracted felons were struck down by the opponents they seemed to have forgotten. The telepathic pussycat sent out another telepathic message, alerting the entire camp of the danger the two were in, asking them to stay safe. Midoriya landed roughly from his sudden flight, taking off in a sprint. As he continued on his path, he heard the distinctive sound of a gunshot, drawing his attention momentarily. He heard even more echoing out. The sound eventually stopped. The jungle hair boy could only hope that it meant the other students had beaten whoever held the weapon. He was suddenly stopped by a monstrous noise and a figure snatching him up. He cried out in pain and heard an apology from Shoji, the figure that had grabbed him. He questioned the injury the multi-limbed male had sustained, receiving news that a villain had attacked him, one that Bakugo and Todoroki were likely facing off against alone. Izuku was ready to go help them, when he was warned by Mizo that if they wanted to proceed, they'd have to face down Dark Shadow. He realized what he meant, and paled as the distorted roar and shadowy figure came into view. He had his fellow student explain the event so that he could get an idea of how Tokoyami's quirk managed to grow into the thing before them. He received information about the weakness of the shadowy beast and began to plan how they could get it to a light source as swiftly as possible. He had Shoji dodge the attacks of the beast before they went towards the place they had last seen the villain. He saw blades of ice sticking out of the trees as he continued running with the masked teen. The arms he made to distribute sound without getting them hit worked well, leading Dark Shadow while keeping them mostly safe. The duo called out for a light source from either one of the classmates. However, their request was halted for a second as Sumikage's quirk turned on the criminal, who was attacking them, putting him out of commission. At the moment he finished, They both bathed the dark being in light, allowing the bird-faced boy control again. Midoriya gave a grim smile at him, offering a hand to help him up. Okay, I don't know if any of you heard, but these villains are after me and Kachan. Katsuki blinked, going into a light daze. I have an idea what they want too. Shigaraki mentioned me being a villain, yet he left me alone at the mall. It's highly likely that we were set up on some sort of a capture list as possible recruits for the League. The implications made the situation much more grim, as Katsuki began to yell out never being a shitty criminal. He was mostly ignored as they all planned a route that would keep the two targets safe, while getting them back to camp as soon as possible. They stayed in formation, eventually coming across Tsuyuasui and Uraraka, the latter seemingly having some of her blood drained before the girl who did the deed ran off into the woods. They explained that they were able to keep Bakugo and himself safe, the two being right next to each other to keep an eye on the other. They had all turned when a hand was pressed against the neck of the protege of Midnight, the blonde next to him instantly noticing the presence of the villain. An explosive attack was issued from him, but it was too late. A second hand grabbed the blonde and in a flash, both of them became marbles. The masked man grabbed them and hopped up into the tree as the remaining students snapped around. Shotos' eyes blazed and hid in anger at the fact his classmates were so easily kidnapped. He let loose a wave of ice to try to trap the criminal, only to see him flying through the air, contacting his fellow villains that they had captured their quarry and to meet up at the rendezvous. The student chased after him, desperate to try to get him in time. The son of Endeavor forced his anger aside, thinking what his friend would plan if he were there. An insane idea flashed across his mind. He had Sue wrap her tongue around him, Ochako and Shoji, flinging them high into the sky right into Mr. Compress, slamming him down into the earth. The villains instantly went on the attack, trying to free their ally. Ochako dodged the tongue of blue flames that was aimed at them, flipping backwards. Their heterochromatic classmates stopped an aerial assault from another villain as Mijo dodged a needle from the blonde girl they saw earlier. He grasped a plastic tube, pulling it tight and swinging the girl directly into a tree. While they were distracted, the man they slammed into the ground popped up from a marble he had left, annoyed that his performance was ruined. The scarred villain next to him questioned if he really had the students. He checked his pockets, shocked to find them empty. Mizo revealed that they had taken their classmates back and fled, seeking shelter in the forest. However, luck was not on their side, as the misty figure from the Warp Gate villain appeared in front of them. The figure appeared by his allies, allowing those there to escape. The source of the blue flames was prepared to go after them to retrieve the students they were after, only to be stopped by the magician. He revealed that he performed a bout of prestidigitation on the student who had routed around in his pockets. He removed his masks, revealing the real marbles were concealed in his mouth. He donned it once more as it began to sink into the rift. The trio sprinted towards them, desperate to go back to their classmates. Only the masked face was left sticking out, just as a laser, Aoyama to be precise, caught his face, knocking their compressed friends out of their mouth. They all reached out for them, one being caught by a hero in training, the other by a villain. Dabi let Shoto skid to a halt as he had his accomplice release their captives to check who they had managed to keep. The form of Bakugo appeared next to the heroes, and Izuku was held by his throat. In shock as he was dragged through the portal, Todoroki ran and thrusted his hand out, trying to save one of his only friends, but he missed. The portal closed and risked the jungle-haired teen somewhere else. Shock and anger registered on all of their faces. The son of Endeavor screamed as a mountain of ice shot from his hands into the forest in front of him. He panted as he cursed himself for not reaching far enough, and not getting there fast enough. Shoji and Ochako went to confront him, blaming themselves as well. Despair was palpable around them as they returned to the camp, prepared to disclose the tragic news to Eraserhead. Midoriya blinked as his eyes adjusted to the lighting of what appeared to be a bar. He heard a voice call from behind him, turning to see a familiar set of red eyes.
I told you you'd be a villain yet.
A grin across Tomura's face chilled the teenager's spine. He felt a small flash of pain across the back of his head before the world went black. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all of our incredible projects that our team is producing right now. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I would like to thank everybody involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's it from us for today's video, so goodbye and have a divine day. Oh yeah!